They say a man can have everything and still feel empty. If you told me that years ago, I'd have laughed in your face. You see, I was Tunde, the village charmer, the untouchable playboy, the man whose smile could make women stumble over their own feet. Life was good, or so I thought. When I walked into the market, the women would pause, their baskets of tomatoes or yams forgotten for a moment, just to catch a glimpse of me. The whispers followed me everywhere. That's Tunde. Isn't he handsome? He can charm a snake into giving up its venom. But none of them knew the truth. Behind my confident swagger and easy grin, I was a man running from himself. Love? Ha-ha. That was a joke I wasn't willing to hear. My heart was a closed door, locked after a daiso, the woman who had taught me that even the brightest smiles can hide the sharpest lies. Adais had been my everything. Her beauty could silence a room, and her laugh was like music. I had imagined a future with her. Children, a home, even a small farm where we'd grow old together. But dreams have a funny way of turning into nightmares. One fateful evening, I saw her with another man, their laughter and stolen glances piercing through me like knives. That was the day I swore never to love again. Since then, women became a game to me, a distraction. They were puzzles I solved and then abandoned, their faces blurring together in my memory. But fate, as they say, has a twisted sense of humor. It was a particularly hot day when my life took an unexpected turn. The sun was relentless, the heat shimmering off the dusty paths of the village. I was walking through the marketplace, minding my own business, when a loud, piercing voice shattered my thoughts. "Handsome man! Yes, you! Why are you walking like a chicken that just escaped the pot?" I stopped dead in my tracks. The marketplace went silent, all eyes turning to me. Slowly, I turned to see who dared to insult me in public. She stood there, a wild figure amidst the crowd. Her hair was untamed, a halo of curls that seemed to have a life of its own. Her clothes didn't match, red and green fabric clashing in ways that would make a tailor cry. But it was her eyes that caught me. They sparkled with mischief, daring me to respond. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with annoyance. "You heard me," she said, unfazed by my glare. "You're walking like you have somewhere to go, but no idea how to get there." The crowd erupted into laughter. I felt my face heat up, not with anger, but with something I couldn't quite name. "And who are you to talk to me like that?" I challenged. She stepped closer, her grin widening. "I'm Ngozi, the woman who just made you look like a fool." The crowd roared again, and I couldn't help but smile despite myself. There was something about her, something unpredictable, wild and magnetic. "Nice to meet you, Ngozi," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll be sure to consult you the next time I need advice on how to walk." "Oh, you'll see me again," she said, winking. "Men like you always come back." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the market, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't get her out of my mind. Her boldness, her laughter, the way she didn't care about what anyone thought. It was maddening. For the first time in years, a woman had managed to intrigue me, and she wasn't even trying. "Who is she?" I asked one of the market women the next day. "That's Ngozi," the woman replied with a chuckle. She's different." Different was an understatement. Over the next few weeks, I found myself bumping into Ngozi everywhere. In the market, near the river, even outside the church. Each encounter was more bizarre than the last. "Tunde, did you know the moon is actually a giant yam?" she shouted one evening, waving at me from across the street. Another time, she cornered me near the well. "Tunde, you need to stop eating pounded yam. It's making you too handsome, and I can't have competition in this village." I should have been annoyed, but instead I found myself laughing. She was crazy, yes, but she was also refreshing, a whirlwind of chaos that swept through my carefully controlled life. Looking back, I realized that my first encounters with Ngozi were like the opening scenes of a play I never expected to star in. She was the opposite of everything I thought I wanted, wild where I sought order, unpredictable where I valued control. But there was something about her madness that spoke to a part of me I had long buried. Beneath her eccentricity was a raw honesty, a fearless way of living that I couldn't ignore. Little did I know this mad woman was about to turn my world upside down in ways I could never imagine. I tried to go back to my usual life, the charming, carefree bachelor whose only concern was how to pass the day without getting bored. But fate had other plans. Everywhere I turned, Ngozi seemed to be there, her wild laughter echoing in places I least expected. It wasn't that I was seeking her out, at least that's what I told myself. But somehow she had a way of making herself impossible to ignore. One sunny afternoon, as I walked past the village square, I heard her voice again. "Tunde, handsome Tunde, come, let me teach you the dance of the ancestors." I turned to see her in the center of a small crowd. She was dancing, or at least attempting to, her movements as unpredictable as her personality. Her arms flailed, her feet moved in random directions, and her face was alight with a joy that made the onlookers laugh and cheer. "Don't just stand there, Tunde. Come and join me," she shouted, pointing at me. The crowd turned to look at me, their faces full of expectation. I sighed, knowing there was no escape. "Why not?" I muttered under my breath, stepping into the circle. As I joined her in her chaotic dance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of freedom. For a moment, I wasn't the calculated, guarded Tunde. I was just a man dancing in the sunlight with a mad woman who didn't care about anything but the moment. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, I found myself walking by the river. It was a quiet place where I often went to think, but that day my solitude was interrupted. "You're here too?" Ngozi's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her, barefoot and holding a flower she must have picked along the way. "Do you follow me everywhere?" I asked, half joking. She shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe the universe just keeps putting us in the same place because we're meant to be." I laughed, shaking my head. "You really are something else." We sat by the water, and for the first time she was quiet. She stared at the river, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder why people hide so much of themselves?" she asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, her eyes serious. "Everyone pretends, Tunde. They act like they're happy when they're not, like they're strong when they're breaking inside. Why can't people just be?" I didn't know how to answer. Her question was so simple, yet it hit me in a way I didn't expect. "And you?" I asked. "Are you pretending too?" She smiled, but it wasn't her usual mischievous grin. It was softer, almost sad. "Maybe I am. Maybe we all are." For a moment, the air between us was heavy with unspoken truths. I realized then that beneath Ngozi's madness was a depth I hadn't noticed before, a pain she carried silently, hidden behind her laughter and chaos. That night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my mind. Was she right? Had I been hiding behind my charm and Playboy ways, afraid to let anyone see the real me? Ngozi was like a storm, chaotic, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. She had a way of shaking up everything I thought I knew about myself, and I wasn't sure if I hated her for it or admired her. All I knew was that she was starting to matter to me in a way I couldn't explain, and that scared me more than anything. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Ngozi became a constant presence in my life, yet she remained an enigma. One moment she was full of laughter and mischief, and the next she would retreat into a silence so profound it felt like she was disappearing right before my eyes. One evening, I found her sitting by the river again. She wasn't her usual lively self. Instead, she looked fragile, her gaze fixed on the water as if searching for answers only the river could provide. "What's wrong, Ngozi?" I asked, sitting beside her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a pebble and tossed it into the river, watching the ripples spread. "Do you ever feel like you're fighting a battle you can't win?" she finally said, her voice soft. I didn't know how to respond. This was a side of her I hadn't seen before, a side that was vulnerable, almost broken. "What kind of battle?" I asked cautiously. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "The kind that makes you question everything, who you are, why you're here, whether you'll ever be enough." Her words hit me hard. For all her wildness, for all her madness, Ngozi carried a depth of pain I hadn't fully understood until that moment. "You're more than enough," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. Do you mean that, Tunde? Or are you just saying it because it sounds nice? I mean it, I said firmly. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she smiled, a small, tentative smile that felt more real than any of her mischievous grins. Thank you, she said softly. A week later, the heavens opened up, drenching the village in a downpour so heavy it felt like the skies were weeping. I was on my way home when I saw her, standing in the middle of the street, arms outstretched as the rain soaked her to the bone. Ngozi, I called out, rushing toward her. What are you doing out here? You'll catch your death. She turned to me, her face lit up with a childlike wonder. Isn't it beautiful, Tunde? The rain washing everything away, making the world new again. You're going to get sick, I said, grabbing her arm to pull her towards shelter. But she resisted, her eyes locking onto mine. Why do you always try to save me, Tunde? Can't you see I'm fine just the way I am? Her words stopped me in my tracks. She wasn't just talking about the rain. She was talking about everything. About her madness, her chaos, her pain. She was asking me to accept her as she was, without trying to change her. I'm not trying to save you, I said quietly. I'm just trying to keep you here, with me. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched my face, her hand cold but her touch warm. You're not like the others, are you, Tunde? You see me, the real me. That night marked a turning point in our relationship. Ngozi wasn't just the mad woman who turned my life upside down. She was a woman with dreams, fears, and a heart that had been bruised but not broken. I began to see her in a new light. Her madness wasn't just madness. It was a defense mechanism, a way of shielding herself from a world that had been unkind. And the more time I spent with her, the more I realized that she wasn't the only one hiding. I was hiding too, behind my charm, my jokes, my refusal to let anyone get too close. But with Ngozi, there was no hiding. She saw through me as easily as she saw through her own chaos. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to run. Looking back, I realized that the rainy night was more than just a moment in time. It was a moment of truth, a moment when I stopped pretending and started feeling. Ngozi taught me something I had never learned from anyone else. That love isn't about fixing someone or making them fit into a mold. It's about seeing them for who they are and choosing to stay, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. And that realization changed everything. Life with Ngozi was anything but ordinary. As our bond grew stronger, the village noticed. People whispered as we passed by in the marketplace, their voices barely veiled under the guise of concern. Tunde and Ngozi? How can a man like him fall for a woman like her? I heard it all. The judgment, the skepticism, the outright disbelief. To them, I was the village heartthrob, the man every mother hoped would marry her daughter. And Ngozi, she was the mad woman who talked to chickens and danced in the rain. But their words didn't matter to me. What did matter was the way Ngozi's smile could light up even the gloomiest day, the way her laughter rang out like music, the way she made me feel alive in a way I never had before. One afternoon, as we walked through the village hand in hand, an older woman stopped us. Tunde, she said, her voice stern, this is not a good match. She will bring you nothing but trouble. Ngozi, never one to back down, stepped forward. Madam, she said with a mischievous grin, trouble is my middle name. And if Tunde wants a life full of adventure, then he's chosen wisely. The woman huffed and walked away, muttering under her breath. I couldn't help but laugh. Ngozi had a way of turning even the harshest criticism into a joke, and I loved her for it. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges. There were days when Ngozi's wild ideas pushed me to my limits, and days when her vulnerability made my heart ache. But through it all, I found myself falling deeper in love with her. One evening, as we sat under the old baobab tree, she turned to me with a serious expression. Tunde, she said, do you think I'm mad? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? Because everyone else does, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. Even you must have thought it at some point. I took her hand in mine. Ngozi, you see the world differently, that's true. But that doesn't make you mad. It makes you extraordinary. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide her emotions behind a joke or a grin. Do you mean that? I mean every word, I said, pulling her close. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of the leaves above us. It was in that moment that I realized something profound. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections make life more beautiful. I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Ngozi, but proposing to her wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't the type to be swept off her feet by grand gestures or romantic cliches. So I decided to do something that was uniquely us. One evening, I took her to the riverbank where we had first met. I had set up a small picnic, complete with her favorite roasted yams and palm wine. As we ate, I pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple ring I had carved myself. "Ngozi," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "You've turned my world upside down in the best possible way. You've made me laugh, cry, and see the world in a whole new light. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" She stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise. For once, she was speechless. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Tunde, you do realize that marrying me means a lifetime of madness, right?" "I wouldn't have it any other way," I said. She laughed, a sound that was pure joy. "Then yes, Tunde, I'll marry you." Looking back, I realized that my love for Ngozi was never about taming her or changing her. It was about embracing her for who she was. Chaos, humor, vulnerability, and all. Our love story wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that made it more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined. Love is not about finding someone who fits into your world perfectly. It's about finding someone who challenges you, inspires you, and makes your world a little bit more colorful. True love is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes even mad, but it's worth every moment.